Voi dovete impedire che un pugno di ruffiani e di frodatori riesca a imbrattare l'Italia. Tutte le azioni necessarie assolva la legge di Roma.
E l'arte è la più nobile delle imprese.
E qui riuscì a rivedere le stelle.
Le storie e le azioni degli uomini eccellenti.
Dobbiamo meritarcela, la storia che ci è capitata. Qualcuno ce l'ha pagata. Non fu gratis.
Il naufragare è dolce in questo mare.
Tanto maggiori sono gli ostacoli e tanto più precisi di vista deve essere la nostra volontà di superarli.
Io direi che è stato creato un grande patrimonio che appartiene alla collettività nazionale, appartiene a tutti gli italiani.
Cold War Fascist Collaborators. It's incredibly fashionable for American communists to accuse the United States government of having some ideological affinity for German Nazism or Italian fascism, when nothing could be further from the truth. The leaders of the United States and the West at large only have an affinity for one ideology: liberalism. Liberalism, understood in the classical sense, has its own history of war, colonization, genocide, and oppression. One need not invoke the specter of 20th century fascism to criticize the contemporary West. Anyone with basic textbook knowledge of history will know that liberalism is chiefly responsible for genocide in North America, the Atlantic slave trade, pioneering eugenics in the early 20th century, 2 world wars, and detonating the atomic bomb, among other things. Alternatively, fascism in power barely made it 20 years before being destroyed at the conclusion of the Second World War. At first glance, violence and racism are similar to liberalism in Italy's colonization of Ethiopia and Hitler's Lebensraum, which is German colonization of traditionally Slavic lands, Poland, Ukraine, and Russia, albeit fascism was constrained by time and, I believe, by intent. However, in that nearly 2-decade span, the dual nature of fascism can be clearly observed, primarily as a middle-class, petty bourgeois nationalism over and against finance capital, manifesting in war or colonialism abroad, to protectionism and social welfare at home, and secondarily as a working-class, proletarian-led nationalism declaring open war on finance capital, implementing expropriation and socialization via corporatism, maintaining trade and friendship with the Soviet Union, and supporting anti-colonial and anti-imperialist movements worldwide. From the Indian anti-imperialist hero Subhas Chandra Bose to the Red Pope and founding member of the Communist Party of Italy, Nicola Bombacci, left-wing fascism is a well-documented but often and intentionally overlooked undercurrent in the broader movement. Admittedly, it's hard for us in the 21st century to imagine how or why 2 factions diametrically opposed from our point of view might choose to exist in the same movement, but that is a discussion for another time. At the beginning of the Cold War, both the United States and the Soviet Union recruited former fascists to serve them in the coming geopolitical clash, and those ex-fascists serving on each side ought to be viewed as a continuation of the left-right duality internal to fascism. Operation Gladio was the codename used for a secret NATO-sponsored and CIA-led paramilitary network in post-war Europe, initially formed to fight in case of a theoretical Soviet invasion. By the 1970s, the network was being used as a tool to manipulate and suppress political opponents of NATO within Western Europe. During the 1960s through to the 1980s, Italy was rocked by a period known as the Years of Lead, characterized by far-right and far-left acts of terrorism. After the murder of 3 carabinieri by a car bomb in Petiano in 1972, attributed to the Red Brigades by Italian authorities, but actually carried out by far-right terrorist Vincenzo Vinciguerra, the existence of the secret network was revealed through an investigation by Judge Felice Casson. Former Lieutenant Colonel Walter Kopp of the Wehrmacht contacted John J. McCloy, a high-level official of the occupation government, in May of 1945, expressing concern that the Soviet Union may invade the Allied occupation zone. Shortly after which, Kopp was named head of the Kibbutz 15 sub-network in Germany, described as a group with Nazi tendencies by official CIA documents released in 2009. The modern German Bundeswehr was practically built by 2 Nazi officers, Adolf Heusinger and Hans Spiedel. Heusinger had been operations chief within the general staff of the High Command of Hitler's army, and from 1941 forward was personally responsible for planning and overseeing the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Spiedel himself was directly involved in the 20th of July plot to assassinate Hitler, orchestrated by Klaus von Stauffenberg, and was held in prison until the end of the war, being the only major player involved with the plot to survive. Finally, Operation Paperclip was a well-known program wherein 1,600 former Nazi scientists and engineers were given political asylum in the United States after agreeing to work for the government. Among them, Herbert A. Wagner and Werner von Braun. Similarly, the Soviet Union also employed ex-Nazi scientists to develop rocketry, atomic weapons, and the Soviet space program. Operation Osoaviakhim, nicknamed the Soviet Alsos by the West, focused on identifying scientists involved mostly with atomic research and securing their allegiance to the Soviet Union. On October the 22nd, 1946, the Red Army transported more than 2,200 ex-Nazi scientists and the contents of their laboratories to the USSR in an operation arguably much larger in scope than the American equivalent, Operation Paperclip. Notable ex-Nazi scientists that were employed by the Soviet Union include Peter Adolf Thiessen, Manfred von Ardenne, and Nikolaus Riehl. Perhaps most notably, Otto von Grotewall, a former premier of East Germany, claimed that Soviet intelligence services removed Hitler's infamous deputy, Rudolf Hess, from Spandau prison on the night of March 18, 1952, and offered to him leadership of the National Democratic Party of East Germany, the NDPD, 1948 to 1989, and a high position in the East German government if he would publicly support communism and the Soviet Union. Hess refused the offer and remained in Spandau for the rest of his life, but that didn't deter the government of East Germany from continuing to recruit former members of the NSDAP. Wilhelm Adam was such an ex-Nazi, a one-time member of the SA, Hitler's brown shirts. He joined the Soviet-backed National Committee for a Free Germany, operating on the Eastern Front in 1944 after being captured at the Battle of Stalingrad. Adam co-founded the NDPD with German communist Lothar Baltz, who had participated in the same committee at the close of the war, openly declaring its purpose was to recruit former Nazis with the message of socialism and patriotism. The NDPD was one of the strongest allies of the ruling SED in East Germany. It sent 52 delegates to the Volkskammer in the 1948 elections and was estimated to have had 110,000 registered members in 1980. In West Germany, Major General Otto Ernst Reimer, who personally foiled the attempted coup in Berlin during the 20th of July plot to assassinate Hitler, founded the Socialist Reich Party, SRP, in 1949, with former SA man Fritz Dorels and future politician and former leader of the Nazi German Student Union, Gerhard Kruger. The SRP was secretly funded by the Soviet Union and the East German government. Through Reimer personally, when it was outlawed in 1952, it boasted over 10,000 members, many of whom had been organized into paramilitary Reichsfront units, according to the West German government. Author Martin A. Lee even claims that from 1950 until it was banned, that the SRP received Soviet funding exclusively, the USSR viewing the reconstituted Communist Party of Germany, KPD, in the West as ineffectual. Reimer is famous for declaring that if the Soviet Union invaded West Germany, he would show them the way to the Rhine, and SRP members would post themselves as traffic policemen, spreading their arms so that the Russians can find their way through Germany as quickly as possible. He continued to act on behalf of Soviet interests following the 1952 ban of the SRP, fleeing to Egypt and working as an advisor to Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser, selling arms to the Algerian National Liberation Front, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and even a reported 4,000 pistols to Fidel Castro. Then there's Joseph Settig and Hans Sommer, both former members of the Schutzstaffel SS intelligence services, who were later recruited by the East German Stasi to spy in West Germany and around the world. Conclusions. The presence of ex-fascists in both camps during the Cold War, whether acting as government officials, politicians, activists, or spies, does not prove that either the United States or the Soviet Union ever had an ideological affinity for fascism. It does, however, highlight an interesting ideological duality within historical fascism, proletarian, petty bourgeois. It explains why the United States continues to support similar movements throughout the world in places like Ukraine without having to actually be fascist. At the end of the day, the United States will back anyone that can overthrow its opposition, such as the Islamic extremists of ISIS and the Taliban, communists like Pol Pot and the Shining Path terrorists, anarchists like Rojava and the Zapatista separatists, and authoritarian right-wingers like Pinochet. Likewise, Putin's Russia will do the same by supporting European non-fascism, South American socialists, the secular Arab regimes, and the various African banana republics. The enemy of my enemy is my friend seems to be the real outcome in the game of geopolitical struggle.
Praxis, leading to a new society of producers. Fascism was an attempt to overturn Anglo-American capitalist hegemony. It was a dialectical application of productive forces for a society of abundance, and it was the attempt to create a society that understood the scientific application of historical nuances and material reality, meaning that the socialism of fascism is a process of becoming.
Scendiamo in campo contro le democrazie plutocratiche e reazionarie dell'Occidente. Popolo italiano!